for such a kind introduction. I'm truly honored today to share this stage with you and our speaker, Jacqueline Poe. One of the reasons I love the YGL program is actually because of you. You have had such a huge impact on me and have been so supportive through good and bad times, which has meant a huge amount personally. You're a huge inspiration, and I admire you and your incredible team, which is mostly female, that support the YGL program, the president, and all of the university initiatives. Today, as Women's Day, it's easy to get caught up in, social media hashtags or big corporate events hosting kind of events on vague notions of equality. But behind all the noise, there are women all around us, especially in this room, that are true change makers, including the speaker we have today. It's incredibly important for women to step up to leadership roles. I actually remember when YGL, it was pretty even kind of men to women ratio in the group, but there was actually no women in leadership positions. And Diane was one of those people that encouraged some women to step up into those leadership roles. And today, as we've seen in this event, we have a pretty diverse and even leadership team for YGL. Seeing other women in leadership roles can elevate our aspirations, and Jacqueline Poe is certainly one of those women. Jacqueline is the Managing Director of the Singapore Economic Development Board, known as EDB, and she's here today to talk to us about leading with impact and spurring economic development. Jacqueline will speak to us about her work and career, and then we'll open up for questions and a short Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, distinguished guests, alumni, parents, students, leaders, and friends of Northeastern University. A very good morning, and I thank you for having me here today. I hear this is the first time your Global Leadership Summit is taking place in Southeast Asia. Correct me if I'm wrong. So for those of you who are visiting, a very warm welcome to our island in Singapore. You are the second delegation from the northeastern part of the United States we've had the pleasure of welcoming, the first being the entourage of Taylor Swift. So I'm often asked by foreign guests what it is that the EDB does. And so I'd just like to tell you a little bit about EDB and a little about economic opportunities and leadership, maybe in a regional context rather than an individual context. You can ask me questions later on. Our mission is to create sustainable economic growth with vibrant business and good job opportunities for Singapore and Singaporeans. We do this mainly by promoting investments and developing industries in areas like manufacturing and internationally tradable services. As such, the EDB was probably one of the first global proponents and executors of what is now known as industrial policy. Through this, we have developed a very complex economy. It may surprise you, but manufacturing accounts for 20% of our GDP. And this includes semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and medtech, energy and chemicals, and aerospace. Many of you think that we may be mainly focused on being a financial center, but even though we are one of the world's top 3 financial hubs, actually, financial services only makes up 15% of our GDP. And many of you think that we may be a center for tourism, and that's the core of what we do, but tourism only makes up 3% of our GDP. So we are a very complex economy, and a lot of it is in advanced manufacturing. Digital services, logistics, hub services, they remain important contributors too. The number of company headquarter projects were doubled last year. So we've been doing industrial policy for 63 years. And that was long before it was fashionable and longer than Singapore has been in existence as a sovereign state. This means that we know that the process is difficult because it is very difficult to pick winning industries and even harder to drop the losers. It is hard to build new industries without the benefit of an existing ecosystem, and yet again harder to manage the long tail of corporate relationships without fear or favor, without distorting market incentives, and ensuring a fair and generally business-friendly environment to all. Countries that are attempting to embark on industrial policy may find the prospect of reviving manufacturing tempting, or the idea that it might be nice to be top of the league in AI, but it is dangerous to ignore the importance of having the administrative capacity, the ecosystem skill sets, and the political continuity to actually make it happen. We do it because Singapore does not assume that we have any relevance to anyone, anywhere at all. We are a small city state with no natural resources. We are half the size of New York City, with about 2/3 the population. And despite our small size and even smaller domestic market, companies from all over the world still come to Singapore because we aim to be as helpful as possible. There are 3 ways in which we do this. First, by providing a stable, predictable, and neutral environment in which to do business. Secondly, by creating an environment for innovation and providing the talent to scale new ideas using Singapore as a testbed. And thirdly, by making Singapore the gateway to one of the most dynamic regions in the world, which is Southeast Asia. While the global economic and political environment is more uncertain and more disrupted than it has been for decades, we see that Southeast Asia and its promising growth prospects as an opportunity for business. According to the IMF, Southeast Asia is projected to be the 4th largest economy in the world by 2030 because of its dynamic economies, youthful demographics, and a growing middle class. Southeast Asia has a population of more than 670 million people, which is double that of the US. About 60% of Southeast Asia's population is currently under the age of 35, which makes them young, like you, because I understand young global leaders in Northeastern cease to be young global leaders at 35. And half of that population will join the middle class by 2030. And this represents a promising consumer market and production base for companies. With growth rates of about 4 to 5% a year until 2030, the combined GDP of Southeast Asia is forecast to be about $10 trillion by 2030. Now, as one of the 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Singapore is fully committed to promoting economic growth and collaboration within Southeast Asia. While the region is very diverse, we're very actively working on initiatives to support regional growth and bring the region closer together by improving trade, investment, and connectivity across the countries. I'm going to focus on 3 areas where we can see the most impact in working with our neighbors for sustainable economic growth and creating good job opportunities in the region. These 3 areas are the digital economy, supply chain resilience, and the energy transition. Firstly, the digital economy. Southeast Asia is poised to experience a significant digital boom in the coming decade. With a young and digitally savvy population, Southeast Asia is home to the most engaged mobile internet users in the world. By 2030, the Southeast Asian digital economy is projected to reach $1 trillion in gross merchandise value. This growing middle class in Southeast Asia also offers opportunities in e-commerce, fintech, gaming, and other digital services. All the major US tech companies have a substantial presence here. But Southeast Asian startups are also making a splash. Notable examples are the all-in-one super apps like Grab and Gojek, which integrate a range of on-demand services, including ride-hailing, food delivery, digital payments, travel, and entertainment bookings all in one. This means opportunities for players in every part of the stack. So we're seeing a boom in digital infrastructure and data centers, middleware, and a whole bunch of applications. While Singapore is a small node in Southeast Asia's digital economy, we seek to harness technology as a tool for social and environmental good and to solve real-world problems faced by the region. Most recently, we put aside $1 billion in our recent budget to support our National AI Strategy 2.0. We had 1.0, it was in 2017 before generative AI. And we put $500 million in for AI compute and a bunch of programs to create 15,000 AI engineers alongside our already substantial tech workforce in the next few years. Some of this will further help develop our large language model called Sea Lion. It stands for Southeast Asian Languages in One Model. It provides 13 billion parameters of contextualized Southeast Asian language data and make it open to companies to create value. Much of it will be to help companies in areas like finance and healthcare and professional services and logistics to adopt AI. Last year, we launched AI Trailblazers, and this was an initiative alongside Google. The aim was to get 100 companies to deepen their AI capabilities via 100 use cases in 100 days. And this included hands-on training to build generative AI solution prototypes and bring them to production to address real-world challenges. Now we know that there remain very differing data and skill standards throughout Southeast Asia. So as we build the Southeast Asian digital economy, Singapore is continuing to forge collaborations with our regional counterparts, such as the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement, which aims to make more data and digital services interoperable across the whole of Southeast Asia. Now, secondly, I'd like to touch a little bit about supply chain resilience. Now, in recent years, the COVID-19 pandemic and then global geopolitical developments have forced companies to relook and reorganize their existing supply chains in order to minimize disruptions. Western companies pursuing a China plus one strategy view Southeast Asia as a viable alternative location, and many of them have set up manufacturing facilities to diversify their supply chains. For example, companies like Micron, GlobalFoundries, Dyson, P&G are already using Southeast Asia as a production base to serve global demand. Northeast Asian companies are also using Singapore as a global headquarters to expand to the world, while building plants and data centers throughout Southeast Asia. Now, to enable companies to expand their manufacturing footprint in the region, we've launched the Southeast Asian Manufacturing Alliance. Under this partnership, companies can tap on Singapore's connectivity and talent and business environment so that they can put their headquarters, their R&D, and their high-value manufacturing here. At the same time, they can locate their more broad-based manufacturing activities within a network of industrial parks in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and so on. In Indonesia, for example, the Riau Islands, which is very nearby, and you can actually see it from some parts of Singapore, it's about 40 minutes by boat. They host a very good range of activities, from digital and software development, there are digital parks in Nongsa, to advanced manufacturing, also in Batam and Bintan. In Vietnam, we have already got 17 Vietnam Singapore Industrial Parks. We call them VSIP, not VIP, VSIP. And in Malaysia, we are working on an exciting new economic zone, special economic zone just across the border in Johor, with what amounts to a new 6-minute rail link coming up in 2026, which is going to make Malaysia very accessible to Singapore. These initiatives should provide jobs and skills opportunities for the talent pool in the region and access the more competitive land, manpower, and utility costs for manufacturing activities in our neighbors. By leveraging the complementary strengths of different Southeast Asian locations, we think we can achieve greater supply chain resilience and, of course, sustainable long-term growth. Now, finally, on sustainability, and sustainability as you know it, environmental sustainability. Singapore is committed to peak our carbon emissions in 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. In Singapore's Green Plan of 2030, we have outlined our plans to transform Jurong Island, which currently houses our refining and petrochemicals industry. Yes, Singapore, which is nowhere near any source of oil, has an oil refinery and petrochemicals industry, into a sustainable energy and chemicals park. And this has really entailed a shift towards reducing emissions via energy efficiency measures. And also, we've recently announced a deal with ExxonMobil and Shell on carbon capture technologies and the first use of carbon capture and storage in Southeast Asia. And of course, we are also manufacturing sustainable products such as bio-based fuels and pyrolysis oil, which is reclaimed from plastics. Singapore has made great progress by partnering renewable energy companies like Neste from Finland who expanded the capacity of its Singapore refinery last year. We are now set to be the world's largest producer of sustainable aviation fuels, or SAFs, which can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 80% compared to conventional jet fuel. Just for a reference, we just announced in the recent air show a mandate for the use of SAFs, and of course, a levy that we would have on air tickets flying in and out of Singapore. Not huge, about $3 to $16, to make that happen. So within a few years, I think we will all be flying on planes which contain some part of cooking oil. You'll be flying on cooking oil. And that is actually going to be a really nice circular story for aviation fuel. So beyond Singapore, most Southeast Asian countries have also set targets to reach net zero by 2050. There's a lot of potential for decarbonization because Southeast Asia is lagging. It is a laggard in the green transition. Fossil fuels generate 75% of the region's electricity. Half of this is derived from coal. So as the region experiences economic and population growth, our carbon emissions per capita are projected to increase by 139% between 2015 and 2040. The only good thing is that it turns out Southeast Asia possesses very ample renewable energy resources, including hydropower, solar power, geothermal, it's the ring of fire for a reason, and wind power. And all of this can help meet the demand and provides a huge opportunity for companies wanting to participate in the decarbonization of the region. There's also a lot of nature-based solutions available in Southeast Asia, including forests and mangroves. So regional collaboration will be crucial to access renewable energy resources. Singapore seeks to support the region in unlocking its significant potential in renewable energy. With more than 100 carbon services companies setting up here in the last few years, Singapore can serve as a carbon services and trading hub to support the growing demand for green finance and renewable energy development and deployment opportunities in Southeast Asia. Also, as part of what we call the ASEAN Green Power Grid, Singapore is exploring opportunities to enhance the flow of renewable energy across borders. So in conclusion, we're welcoming the friends and family of Northeastern to join us on this journey. Maybe you want to think about expanding your company to Singapore, or to explore new opportunities by taking advantage of our numerous talent visas, the Tech Pass, the One Pass, Employment Pass, Entre Pass, to come and work here. We can provide you information about all of that. One way to get in touch is through the Singapore Global Network, which is a 120,000 strong community of professionals and friends seeking to deepen connections in Singapore and globally. We've put some introduction cards into your welcome bags for more information about how to connect to us. And you can also go to the EDB website if you want to ask about visas to work in Singapore. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to talk to this very energetic and dynamic audience. And for all the ladies here, have a great International Women's Day.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, for opening our eyes to all of the wonderful things that Singapore is doing. A big theme for us yesterday at the conference was digital transition, AI, and we talked about it a lot from an internal business perspective, but it would be really great just to hear your perspective from the government side on how that relationship between private sector and public sector has flourished here in Singapore and some of the things that you've implemented to allow that to happen.
Thank you very much. Well, I think in Singapore, we believe that the government is fundamentally an enabler. It shouldn't be a player. It shouldn't run ahead of the private sector. On the other hand, it shouldn't lag the private sector too far either. We've seen the pitfalls of some of that happening. There are countries that never understood how digital works, where governments don't understand digital. And when you don't understand digital, it means a few things. You're ill-equipped to provide the enabling infrastructure to ensure that new technologies are used. That may include a nationwide broadband network like the one we put in place in 2008 that enabled every household by about 2012. Every household in Singapore had access to very high-speed broadband internet. It may also result in a situation where you don't regulate certain things like fintechs or various aspects of data protection, data privacy, and cybersecurity until it is too late. So you don't want to be too late, and you don't want to be trying to be too early and front running the game. So it's not easy for governments to take a very exactly the kind of Goldilocks role that it needs to play. What we do to kind of actually mitigate some of this is, first of all, Singapore government does a lot of futures thinking. We have a Center for Strategic Futures. We've been doing scenario planning on a national level since the 1980s or 90s, and we've learned that from Shell. So we've actually always had a strong sense of what we want to think about as the future in 30 years' time or 50 years' time. And that's kind of helped us think through some of the trends that could happen a little bit ahead of time. A lot of the geopolitical disruption that we see in the world today is things that we had kind of looked at in the year 2001. And the changes in technology around AI was something that we had done quite deep dives on in 2018 and 19. So we were a little bit equipped, a bit better equipped to think about things like AI governance, but also AI enablement. So I mentioned some of the things that we do in terms of enablement in my speech just now. It was really important for us to think about ensuring that there was enough power, enough compute available for our businesses and our citizens to benefit from AI. So we put a lot of effort into ensuring that was, we were able to get hold of that. It was also important for us to, have the skill sets available for a lot of people to either be in the position to create products based on AI or be co-pilots, so that they would be a little less disrupted by what is likely to be an extremely changing AI revolution. Our unions are always thinking about like what is going to happen next, but unlike most unions, the first thing our unions did was to get together with Microsoft and pledge to train a very large number of workers to be AI co-pilots. Singapore could do that because we are fundamentally quite small. So the amount of loss of jobs you'll expect is kind of offset by the fact that we don't have those people in the first place. So to us, new technologies like automation and AI are actually a big plus. They are an answer to our problem. They are not necessarily the issue that we have to face. So we've done a lot to also ensure that the key industries that we'd like to see use AI for augmentation and productivity improvements, and these include healthcare, financial services, professional services, supply chain and logistics, are able to create platforms in order to be able to pull the data that is relevant to that sector and inference it into, say, foundational models. So these are the kind of things that we think government can do. Government itself spent a lot of effort just adopting AI within our own systems as early as the second quarter of last year. So we had already worked with a number of providers in Silicon Valley to be able to use our own software development expertise, because we have I used to run the government technology agency, and we have a really nice group of software developers, hundreds of them, called Open Government Products. And they took on the challenge to develop something called PAIR, P-A-I-R. I guess I don't know what the P stands for and the R, but the AI is AI. They've been working on this since early last year to actually be able to integrate AI into government processes. when Sam Altman came a few months ago, last year, he was like, we're definitely the government that has the most advanced and progressive implementation of AI. So it's important to understand how this works so that you can either regulate it in an intelligent way, such as not to curb developments and curb innovation, but also in a way that protects your young people and your citizens from the more nefarious. There's always a dark side to every technology. And then at the same time, so that you know what the enablers are and can actually, as a government, put in the resources and the budget to make that happen.
I think that's so important, the human capital element of what Singapore is doing, because I think for us in the private sector, we find it extremely frustrating with governments in different countries where people in the governments are not educated or up to date on what's happening in the technology sector or AI. And so it makes it very frustrating and bureaucratic to move forward with new ideas and new businesses. I know you're very tight on time. We actually have like a clock here counting down. So I wanted to just open it up to anyone else that may have a question for Jacqueline to take this opportunity.
Hi, Jacqueline. Really great to see you in Kersburg from the Young Global Leaders. I lived in Singapore 15 plus years, and my dad was actually on the Economic Development Board 20 years ago when he ran P&G in the region. So I'm very familiar with EDB. Maybe real quickly, both Archit and myself, who are Young Global Leaders, run the Startup Grind chapter here. So we do a lot of work with startups. Can you maybe talk about EDBI a little bit and the work you do with startups and trying to attract some of those to Singapore?
Thanks. That's a really good question. We've been building the Singapore startup landscape for 15 years now. So I think it's reached a certain point that within Southeast Asia, it's a very dense ecosystem. There's quite a lot of funding. There's a lot of VCs. I think there are about 400 major VCPEs in Singapore. There are about 200 accelerator programs. I think there are about 4,000 plus startups. For AI, we have committed to putting aside, there's an iconic location that we're putting aside for all the AI startups. So we're really keen to see if you have one to come to Singapore, because we're going to make a lot of things available there. So startups have been an interesting part of where the economic evolution of Singapore is. So from MNC-led growth and sort of, Temasek link companies to, entrepreneurs. And I think we are at the stage where a lot of those entrepreneurs are coming out to another phase of development. EDBI is EDB Investments. It's a $4 billion fund. And then we invest in a range of growth stage, generally actually right at the moment, growth stage startups. And we have this year an increased focus on deep tech. But we also work with the Enterprise Singapore, which runs Startup Singapore as Startup SG, which provides, other kinds of seed funding. So there is another fund called Seeds Capital, which provides a great amount of seed funding to local startups so that they can just get started. So across the whole chain, from pre-seed to seed, all the way to Series A, Series B, and so on, there will be someone who will be willing to take care of you. And the thing about the ecosystem, as we mentioned, like we do try and take a look at what is needed. So then, for example, for deep tech, if deep tech follow-on funding, Series B, is actually missing, then it is something we want to intervene on, for example. So yeah, so we are hugely supportive of new startup growth in Singapore, and more importantly, scaling.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Maarten Inkemerendijk. I'm also a young global leader, and I'm in the recycling industry. So I understand that Singapore incinerates all their garbage right now. In a very good way, they have CO2 capture and all of that. But I'm wondering if it has any plans to start recycling, especially considering you mentioned pyrolysis to turn plastics into fuel. And it could be a full circle right there to bring the plastics back. What are the plans there?
Yeah, thanks. We do have a plan called Towards a Zero Waste Singapore. I always like these towards things. So it's like asymptotic. You don't necessarily have you get towards it. Zero is a very hard thing to achieve. But we are doing a lot of things on circular economy in terms of including the plastics piece. So we have a waste to energy generally. Even our waste to energy plant is where we actually burn our current municipal waste, and then that creates energy. Then the waste becomes ash, and the ash becomes an island called Semakau. And then recently we've pulled up the ash from Semakau to create something called new sand, because we have new water, which is recycled water in Singapore. And now we have something called new sand, which is building materials from that waste. Nothing is wasted in Singapore. We have a very small footprint. We contribute 0.1% of carbon emission with very small footprint. And because we've been so constrained for such a long time, we have to be very creative. The recycling of the water, recycling of the sand, and all that. They're actually, in many cases, world's firsts and actually commercializable. The issue with plastics is to get enough of it. So a lot of commercial providers find that no matter what, Singapore just doesn't generate enough plastic waste to make it worth their while. Either for pyrolysis, we are supporting a number of parties to actually separate out some of this for pyrolysis oil, because it's high value. But even then, we can't support a lot of it, like a huge an operation, because we don't generate enough waste plastics for this. We could import it, but we'd end up with the carbon. The carbon would be counted against us if we import plastics. And there's a Basel agreement, something about like not have dumping your stuff in other countries. So these are some of the considerations we have. So this is actually one of the reasons why I say regional cooperation is important, because even it's not in Singapore, there are countries around us that are generating an awful lot of plastic waste. And we're part of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of actually doing the recycling, maybe not in Singapore, but with a very effective collection mechanism, it can actually make a lot of sense in other countries as well, with Singapore as the technology hub.
Hi, good morning, Jacqueline. My name is Federico. I'm part of the Young Global Leaders as well. And with cryptocurrency right now booming and Bitcoin getting to the all-time high once again, I wanted to ask you, how is Singapore preparing the terrain for this new industry? And also, do you think the government will eventually charge any capital gains on this kind of trading?
No, we don't have a capital gains tax. I just remind you, we have no capital gains taxes. We also have no inheritance taxes. And we have fairly low corporate income and personal income tax, okay? What we do have is a big tax on cars. But that's in order to keep the traffic flowing. Crypto, if you recall a couple of years ago, Singapore was thought of as the crypto hub of the world. And during that time, I think we were well known to have a very transparent and predictable and regulatory regime. We continue to have that. Our system is extremely, it's well thought through. I think with the Monetary Authority, has a very well thought through system. And we make that very, very clear to all players who want licensing in this area. So we continue to license Web3 and crypto players who meet all the conditions. And that includes Coinbase and Crypto.com, which has its, by the way, headquarters in Singapore. So we don't stop doing what makes sense for us, according to what we have analyzed are reasonable. And we do have stronger requirements about retail investors and advertising to retail investors. That didn't go so well the last time there was a crypto boom. A lot of grandparents lost their money. People say, no, a lot of 12-year-olds lost their money, but they've got a time to make it back. It's the pensioners that we were concerned about. So advertising and retail, and of course, anti-money laundering. These are, clearly important areas that we keep an eye on. So we have not changed our stance. We were consistent then. We were consistent right through. And so when people said, why don't you license faster? We said, no, these are the rules. And you just abide by these. And then when everyone else stopped licensing and there was a crypto downturn, we were still licensing. So we do us. It's very clear what these things are. It protects and it promotes innovation while protecting vulnerable parts of the population. And we're just going to stick to that.
Thank you very much for being here. This was extremely illuminating, and thank you for spending time with us. We understand that Singapore has a lifelong learning account for every citizen, and this makes it unique in the world now. In the United States, there is an enormous need for lifelong learning, and we set up around 13 campuses in Canada, in the UK, and in the United States to also meet the needs. To what extent do you have any utilization lifelong learning account? But who is the provider? More importantly, are the universities embracing lifelong learning, or is it something that you are doing with the companies, or is it a triangle?
Very, very good question, and also a great opportunity for me to talk about Skills Future Singapore, which is the lifelong learning program of the government. And I think it was the first major nationwide program anywhere, and it's very aggressive. And more recently in the budget, more money was put inside, and then a second bite of the cherry for subsidized tertiary education. So the whole notion is that you're probably going to have, because people live longer, and Singapore is a blue zone. So Singaporeans live and stay healthy for a long time. And therefore, retirement ages have been going up because there's no way, people would get bored and have no money if we didn't actually say, okay, I think people are going to work a bit longer, but let's ensure that they stay relevant and they're paid decently and that they, kind of find meaning in their work. So based on the notion that we're among the longest lived people in the world, we stay healthy for longer, we're probably going to be working for much longer as a result. You are also going to see the notion of having not one, but probably 2 to 3 careers within anyone's lifetime. If you believe that you're going to have 3 careers in your lifetime, you're probably going to need to be reskilled at least twice. So a main degree, and then again, maybe a diploma or another tertiary degree in something that is maybe adjacent or maybe not even adjacent to what you were doing before. Singapore government has acknowledged this for some time, so we've had to put in place mechanisms to be able to pay for it. So the individual learning account, which is the Skills Future account, has credits, and the government puts money into everyone's account so that they can, it'll be like usually 1,000, 500,000, 1,500, 2,000 at a time, so that individuals can go and pick up learning relevant to themselves. Sometimes the amounts are very subsidized, as in you take a course for career conversion, Skills Future career conversion. Say you are a chemical engineer and you want to be a data scientist, or what turned out to be my Harvard-educated data scientist who had a PhD, who wanted to be a barista. It works always. And you can actually do that using Skills Future. There are these small credits as well that you can use for, flower arrangement, cooking classes. And in my case, I was keen to do electrical, and I wanted to be an electrician because it was very expensive to get someone to go redo my wiring. So it was that or plumbing and carpentry, and nobody wants to do plumbing, so electricals was it. So I think everyone then, so they're the big courses that you have, which are career conversion type courses where you're likely to be entering a new industry, and that's a lot of money that will be thrown in. So that's your Skills Future account plus additional subsidies. And then there's the smaller types, which is like the barista stuff, where you can go and learn a new skill. Maybe that will be your side hustle one day. Maybe not. So a lot of people actually have made it their side hustle. But it's up to you. And if you go on the Skills Future website, there's a very large, you just Google Skills Future, there's a large number of courses that you can go for. There's also a website you can look at called My Careers Future, which is all the jobs in Singapore. And then the jobs in Singapore are linked to the skills. So if you go on My Careers Future and you say, this is me, and these are my current skills and my university degree, and then it's like, oh, then this is the job that I want to go for, and those are the competencies required. And then they'll provide you with the courses you need to bridge the gap. and then the subsidies and the skills future credits that are available for you individually, because we have a national digital identity with all of that inside. So it'll tell you like exactly what is available to you.
What's the degree of penetration for instance, are universities providing that?
Yes.
Because in the United
Yes,
States,
absolutely. Yeah. So universities have gone into the notion that their degrees are sort of, they need to be refreshed, right? So it's just not that you do a once off. So the National University of Singapore has a number of programs that NUS students who have graduated, their graduates can come back to do various programs or to do things that what we call stackable modules. So you stack towards another qualification. You either stack towards another qualification or you just get a refresher for free. That should be part of an education. Like more than one bite of the cherry should be part of an education. Now, how that is funded is the question. And in Singapore, we've chosen to fund it where the second bite is now funded by us. But in another system, I think you have to find a way of making sure that that is actually funded. So yes, the universities embrace Skills Future, the polytechnics engage. It's not just the companies. Each university has set up their centers for lifelong learning. And NUS has something called SCALE. I can't remember what it stands for, but something lifelong education. And it does coordinate all those programs so that people come back to the university to either get better in the thing that they graduated from or do something different.
Well, thank you very much for educating us on the attractiveness of Singapore, lifelong learning, something for Northeastern to think about more. And thank you for being a visionary leader in every space here in Singapore. Thank you.